Lawrence Korb, he's a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress and a former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense. So clearly an escalation in tensions over, well, oil tankers in the Gulf. Are we likely to see then a continuation of these close encounters between Iranian, UK and U.S. military forces?
Well, I think we will, because obviously Iran felt that they had to respond after the UK seized their tanker last week by claiming it violated the European Union sanctions about sending oil to Syria. Obviously, since we sent the drone over toward Iran, which they shot down about a month ago, I'm not surprised that they have drones monitoring U.S. ships. I think as this goes on, the U.S. ought to do what it did back in the 80s by reflagging a lot of these tankers to make sure that the Iranians don't continue to attack them, because then they would be attacking the United States. But eventually this thing, we have to be careful it doesn't get out of hand. I don't think either side wants a military confrontation, but some of these things could lead to it, because the IRGC is not exactly on the same page as, for example, Foreign Minister Zarif, who's in New York, talking about starting negotiations again.
Right. So you mentioned there, obviously, that Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif is in New York. And while negotiations seem a distant prospect, given the gap between the two sides, could these recent tensions in the Gulf perhaps be another way of securing as much leverage as possible ahead of some sort of dialogue?
Well, there's no doubt about it, because the Iranians don't want to come back to the table unless some of the sanctions are lifted, because they're causing horrible problems in Iran. On the other hand, the United States wants to get some indication from Iran that they would be willing to make some modifications, for example, on the ballistic missiles. So it's important that we get back to the negotiating table. The French have tried, the Japanese have tried. Maybe we can get the Russians to get involved in that, because they're obviously deeply involved in Syria, and they like the arms control agreement. So we need that. And the only good thing here is Trump does not want a war, because his supporters are telling him, if you do this, it's going to really hurt your election chances, because he campaigned to get us out of these Middle East wars.
But, well, President Trump might not want a war, but the problem is that key members of his cabinet, such as National Security Advisor John Bolton, don't particularly want negotiations either. No,
they don't. But I thought it was interesting to go back in North Korea, when the president, after the G20 meeting, went over to North Korea to see Chairman Kim. John Bolton was actually in Mongolia. He only took his family. So I think he doesn't pay as much attention as presidents normally would to their national security team. In fact, he said that several times. I think Bolton provides him some political cover with the neoconservatives, but the president thinks he's a great deal maker. And if the two sides can come to a face-saving way to start the negotiations, I think we'll be okay. But I do worry about an accidental conflagration here with drones, for example, or seizing the ships that could get out of hand.
Thank you very much for joining us on the News Hour. Lawrence Korb, former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense.
Thank you for having me.